Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
The Long Haul 2, Part 3, by Bear Lair 64. Present. It's our friend. Let's get him, Daffodil alerted Wanda, who was driving a car they had liberated from a victim the previous evening. Raisin was in the back seat and as alert and as ready as he was able. Weasel was parked in a dark area, a little way up the road. He would wait to see them pull in behind the target truck and flash their headlights, then pull the van in front of the truck. The driver would probably stop. Weasel was high enough that he wasn't too worried. He saw the large, older model car pull out onto the 4-lane roadway and in beside the truck panel that approached him. The lights flashed and he drove forward. He stopped the van directly across both eastbound lanes, perpendicular to the traffic flow. He was elated by the sound of squealing brakes. The truck driver had nowhere to go but the ditch. Then he heard the engine roar. When he saw the big old clunker pull in beside him and flash its lights, Scott, already paranoid, looked around for a trap. He started to brake so that the car would pass him. Then he registered that the van had pulled out in front of him was the van, the weirdos. His options were to ram the car that he wasn't sure was involved, drive into the deep ditch on his right, or he downshifted and accelerated. This ends tonight, freaks. The driver in the van stared at him stupidly through the open window and did not react. The car beside him braked and slowed to avoid hitting the van. That gave Scott the opportunity to angle towards the driver's side door at the last minute. He could always claim that he turned that way to avoid the collision. At the last moment, he slammed on his brakes to leave skid marks, and then left off and rolled into the side of the old van. "He's gonna hit Weasel!" Daffy screamed in alarm. "He's crazy!" By the time she'd said the last, the wreck was a fait accompli. The truck was angled across both lanes, and they could see the driver tugging furiously to release his seatbelt. Wanda barely managed to get the big sedan stopped. She angled towards the ditch, but managed to stop on pavement. "He's running towards the back of the truck," she shouted unnecessarily. They clambered out of 3 of the 4 doors on the large pink Thunderbird and rushed towards the back of the truck, with blood their intent. They arrived to see the cargo door closed and to hear a click as an interior lock engaged. "He's trapped. Let's go check on Weasel." Daffodil followed her own directions and ran around the back of the truck and saw the van. What was left of it? The 3 of them stood gaping in horror. The van had flipped on its side and then its roof. There was gore and shattered glass splattered all over the roadway, and a meaty lump sprawled messily in the roadway. Weasel had been ejected and subsequently flattened by the bulk of the rolling van. The instant insanguination had put an end to his travels. Daffodil screeched and ran towards the cold, congealed mass that had been her undead lover and companion for her long unlifetime. Wanda, who had just held a crush on their unelected leader, fell to her knees and quietly sobbed. Raisin, who had just lost the only friend he'd had back when they'd all held breath in their bodies, felt first a gaping void of emptiness, then an encompassing rage. He dashed for the back of the truck and began to pull ferociously at the door to try and raise it. The girls soon joined him, emulating the furies of old, as each clawed frantically to get into the cargo space to rip the truck driver to shreds. As the other vehicle stopped and people began to rush up to help, the vehemence of the 3 abated a little. Several people had stopped and taken out phones to record rather than to call for assistance. From inside the cargo area of the truck, they heard laughter. Raisin struck out at the steel sliding door for a few more times, under the weight and grasp of his companions, pulled him from the task and towards the ditch. They had leaped across and fled into the darkness of an abandoned lot. They were stranded, and Weasel was dead. Like, for sure dead, man, Daffy sniffled as they ran. Raoul was annoyed. He really wanted to get a look at the scene where the flashing lights were, and the crowd of people and cars were packed and milling. He was on duty and had to lock up the outer gates at the outlet mall. It had once been a nice place, full of high-end retainers. Now it was essentially a flea market inside a solid structure. Still, it was a good job to work security. Easy work, locking doors and making sure that a few taggers as possible added their unique artwork to the already loud and flashy colors with which the new owners had covered the complex. He glanced once more in longing to be near the fun, maybe a bad wreck with torn bodies. He started to turn back to the electronic locking pad, but did a double take. 3 figures were running from the scene of mayhem, directly toward him. Maybe I can get some fun out of this after all, he thought happily. It was a man and 2 women who arrived at the gate. Paul shined the flashlight towards them and in his most stern and forbidding voice ordered them to stop. Security! This is private property. His words were cut short. The trio had not stopped, but instead had tackled him like a team of jackals. They pushed him onto his back, and the male with the funny splotch on his face leaned in and nuzzled at his neck. This can't be happening, his mind shuddered. Hey, dude, I'm not like that, he said in shock. About then he realized that each of the women had taken a hold of one of his arms. He felt 3 simultaneous puncture wounds. They stung and were instantly sore. And then a sense of bliss washed over him. A cool contentment as he watched the world reduced to a gray, ever-darkening tunnel. His last glimpse of light was the amber flashlight from the golf cart he used to patrol the parking lot. That was pretty crazy and pretty clever all at once, Valerie Lefevre assured her client. You did right to call the police and then call me before you gave them a statement. Seems there were witnesses this time, a couple of drivers in the oncoming lane. One of them even managed to record most of the incident, pardon the pun. But I think this will get you off scot-free. She grinned at that tired and still shaking Scott Wilson. Yes, ma'am, he returned with a tight smile of his own. I couldn't think of anything else to do but be ready to hide in the back. I didn't know that the guy would pull out in front of me. It was a really dumb move. I had nowhere to go. It was like some teens on dope made their plan. He shrugged. I don't like that the guy died, but I like even less that his friends got away from the scene. Maybe somebody got video of them? If I can see it, I can identify at least 2 of them as the ones I first saw. Val nodded. Working on that. What no one has brought up yet is that they found another body drained of blood earlier this morning, and near the scene. I have no doubt that your hippie friends were involved. Maybe they were some kind of, vampire cult? She said the last in a skeptical manner in the hopes that Scott might reveal any opinion he may have had on the subject. He obliged. I've had plenty of time to think about that, and it occurred to me that they were the ones draining blood from people. First that trooper, then all those street people. They had pretty freaky teeth, maybe some kind of implants, and they did not look healthy. That's still pretty freaky. Weird that they'd leave the body out in the open like that. I guess they intended to move on, maybe even leave the city. At least I hope they did. I already want the van. I can't rest or anything, man, Wanda complained. Daffodil patted her on the shoulder. I know, it's creepy being in a building like this without it. Feels like it's time to sleep, but who could do that without the van being nearby? Weird being in this old department store. I remember when it was one of the popular ones. Very stylish. Now it's just a shell that not even the dregs will rent for their crappy stores. She assumed a wistful look. I'm glad there are still some mannequins. Feels like we're in a crowd. Maybe like back at Woodstock. Raisin lay in a fetal ball and twitched in fitful slumber. That dude can sleep anywhere, Wanda observed. You think we can get the van? I miss the van. We need it. Sheriff, you were friends with the man who is now a werewolf, and you met a being who was once one of your canine officers and was married to Earl's daughter, who started life as a puppy. You lost another deputy to the transformation to werewolf, and still another who left to become an EMT because she couldn't deal with the monster encounters. Surely it's not so strange that there's also vampires out there, Val reasoned into the secure line with Sheriff Gene Cloud. He exhaled through his nose, clearly frustrated. I know, Miss Lefevre. Val, it's not about doubting you, just a gut reaction to such news. How many kinds of legendary monsters are stalking about these days? The world is getting crowded. Guess they had to start showing through the cracks in the wall of humanity that press against everything. Still, vampires? Do they have superpowers like the movie ones? Or are they more down to earth like, well, the monsters we know? She gave a shrug that he couldn't see. I don't really know, but I don't think they are all that hyper-powerful, just bloodthirsty. If they'd been super strong, they'd have ripped the door off the back of the panel truck and drained the blood from my client or left him in shreds. The deputy that the undead state police officer attacked at the county morgue lived. He's hurt, but on the mend, and the former state officer is now fully dead, deep fried in the blood he'd taken from others. At least we know that part of the vampire legend is true. They don't tan well. I wish Earl was able to help. He and Lacey could track and take out some of these freaks in no time. But I think that's why he wanted to train me, so I could take care of things on my own. He sure did, the sheriff agreed. I'm glad he let us help with that. By the way, have you seen the pictures of the Knox baby boy? Tom and Julie are over the moon. They named him Thomas Earl. Val gave an unseen smile. Yes, I'll get over to visit as soon as I can get a break. I'm a full-time attorney these days and apparently a part-time monster hunter. I truly appreciate all you and your deputies taught me. Gives me some better memories of the old hometown. Where you are welcome back at any time, even though you are a dang old lawyer. He chuckled. I'll put Tom and Julie to work on it. They are out on maternity leave, and I know they will both want something to do. I can't give them anything official, but they'd love to help, especially since it's you. The city police property yard supervisor shook his head at the tow truck driver. Dang, Gerald, that thing's a mess. Still, with a fatality involved, we best put it inside until the techs and investigators have a chance to look it over. Don't see many of those microbuses these days. Darkest tint I've ever seen. No wonder the driver pulled out in front of that truck. He couldn't see. Gerald nodded. Yes, sir. The only bigger mess was the driver. No seatbelt, ejected. Looked like people burger. Weird thing, by the time the EMTs arrived, the body had started to reek like it had been out in the sun for a couple days. Worst one I ever smelled. Bunch of other junk scattered along the roadway, old luggage, clothes and stuff. Some bottles of booze, and a really old and well-worn bong. The officers bagged it and put it in the front seat. There's some more in the very back, now scattered all over the interior, I suppose. Real mess, but no blood splatter. Bin number 4? The sergeant nodded, and Gerald backed the old van into the secure garage space. Before he left, he called Sergeant Hayhurst. Hey, Sarge, we didn't drain the fuel tank. Don't think there's a leak, but I'm supposed to let you know in case they need to use the cutting torch. I can, feel which way the van is, man. Wanda gritted. As soon as it's full on dark again, we need to, get to it. Raisin sat up, a mournful look on his otherwise slack features. Yeah, we need to feed again on the way. Place sure is noisy. Guess Fridays are like that. Full of good-smelling blood. We need to get moving anyways, van or no van. Daffodil sat against a wall, her knees clutched closely against her upper body. I can't believe Weasel. He's gone. I miss him so much. He could be so annoying, but he wasn't stupid. He would have made a plan. It's what he did. They moved to the front of the old store and watched as the security staff, who all seemed to look a little warily at the customers, herded people out into the night. It was closing time. Raisin gave a nasty smirk. Wonder if the security guards are nervous about their dead buddy, or just because of their usual clientele. It was a simple matter to slip out of the interior entrance to the old store and into the gaggle of customers as they filed through the outer doorway and into the night beyond. We need a car of some kind, Wanda said, in a more determined manner than she used since they'd lost their friend and primary driver, Weasel. It helped that she now saw purpose, getting back to the van. They followed the flow of people as they left and sought their various means of transportation. Some headed for the nearby bus stop. That's the one, and the feast. Daffy pointed at an older couple who toddled along arm in arm towards a decrepit minivan. The trio ambled towards the couple in their van, walking calmly as to keep their prey calm. This'll be easy, Daffodil thought. They're old. Blood won't taste great, but it's a van, sorta. The elder male saw them first and nudged his wife. She reached into her purse and handed him an object. He turned towards the blood-drinking carjackers. Hold it. You're not getting our van, and you are not going to rob us. We've had enough of that sort of thing. Go on and bother somebody else. The man held a small-framed revolver menacingly and pointed it at Raisin's face. Raisin ignored the man and reached towards him. The .38 caliber pistol barked out a sharp report and several inches of flame that briefly illuminated Raisin's features as a round entered the purple blotch on his face. It was quickly followed by 4 more, one of which entered his left eye socket and removed a portion of his brain by way of a new opening in the back of his skull. Along with the tissue, dried blood and gunk splattered, and he collapsed, blood flowing from his wounds, eyes staring into eternity. Wanda and Daffodil looked at one another, then the elderly couple, then down at the cold and truly lifeless body of their companion. Daffodil growled, "We need that van, and we need their blood." She and Wanda surged forwards. Soon they had the couple pushed into the back seat and driven madly to a restaurant parking lot a few blocks from the mall, where they leaned over the front seat and dined. I was wrong, Daffodil decided as the fresh blood filled her. These people were scared. That always tastes good. Besides, they're about the ages we would have been, and I'm pretty sure they took some wild medications today. Freaky. The vampires switched victims to get some variety to their suppers. The old man had some okay meds in his blood, but the lady had something pretty strong, and she had to have smoked something recently, Wanda opined from the front driver's seat. Daffodil, a little bemused, nodded as she drove as directly as she could in the direction of their mobile lair, the VW microbus. She was a little dizzy and had to focus to keep from wrecking the minivan. Not much we can do. Paint's already rotted off the top and the transmission's about to go, she thought, but did not share that with Wan. Yet she shared her despair and anger. I can't believe it. We spent all those years on the road. Nobody ever reacted fast enough to stop us. We always managed to trick 'em. Maybe we underestimated 'em because they were old. Now we've lost both our dudes. I'm sad and, to put Weasel's words, pissed. We have the blood. Now I want our van. Val shook her head and addressed her internal dialogue. The legends just don't help. At least what's online. Too much crap from movies and recent lore. Still, that's one old article. They are not super monsters, just blood-drinking fiends with an unnatural half-life. Creatures of the grave. That would explain why that weirdo van driver had already disintegrated. Hope the coroner doesn't get in trouble for telling me. Now, how to kill them according to the oldest stories. I'll make an Earl list. 1. Remove the head. 2. Burn them with fire or in the sun. 3. Pin them in their grave face down with a stake through the heart so that they starve. 4. Keep them away from their grave or tomb, and they will waste away. The old information has suggested locking them in a church, but that was likely not necessary. Waving crosses or garlic at them would do nothing. 5. Cause instant insanguination, as in hitting them with a truck. She was startled when her phone rang. It was her new contact, the medical examiner/coroner, Dr. Gottlieb. Miss Lefevre, there was a fatal shooting at Gulf Point Mall about a half hour ago. It was nearly where those 3 fugitives fled last night. They carjacked an older couple and the male was killed. His corpse behaved as the other male. These things are on the loose again, so please be careful. Val thanked the good doctor and assured him she would take proper precautions. She considered various authorities she might contact, but ultimately determined, nope, I have to do this myself. Earl, Lacey, where are you when I need you? She said as she gathered her emergency tools, some provided by her Uncle Earl by way of his connections with Sheriff Cloud, and headed out into the night. She had a notion as to where the creatures may be going. It's down this way. I can, feel it, man. Daffodil unnecessarily informed her friend, who could feel the same mental tug towards the vehicle of their entombment. The city police storage yard. She laughed at her weak joke a little harder than was warranted. It was a stress laugh, and Wanda joined her. Yeah, well, I'm tired of all these, law enforcement types. That trooper we turned was more like the pigs from when we were young. They got better ones these days, but not that guy. Let's face it, Daffy, even 15 years ago we didn't look as stunning as we did the day before Woodstock started. But he tried to rough play us anyway. They shared a more sinister laughter that turned to savage growls in memory of events past. 15 years before present. "Oh, man," Weasel exclaimed. "Heads up, we're getting stopped," he said to Daffodil and Wanda. They drove a recent liberated sedan while Raisin followed in the van, which was loaded, indeed packed, with recently acquired loot. Wanda, in the back seat, peered over her shoulder at the dazzling red and blue flashing lights and the alternating headlights that pierced her sharp night vision. "Looks like a state trooper. Don't count on any slack, dude." They pulled over to a darkened area of the wild, improved shoulder, and the state vehicle pulled in behind them. The trooper canted his vehicle slightly and stopped so that his passenger side headlight flashed annoyingly into the rearview mirror of the sedan, and his driver's side headlight equally washed out the view in the driver's side mirror. Shortly, a lean man stepped from the police vehicle, put on a hat, and began to stalk towards them. He briefly touched the truck as he passed it, and shined his flashlight into the back seat and Wanda's eyes. She flinched and held up her hands to block the painful stream of light. He stopped at the driver's side door and shined his flashlight into Weasel and then Daffodil's eyes, blinding each in turn but giving himself an advantage should the people he had just tried to stop try to attack him. "Good evening. I'm Trooper Trieo. The reason I stopped you..." After the introduction, he asked for Weasel's driver's license and proof of insurance. From long experience, Louise has learned that when they liberated a vehicle from its living owner, they needed to find all the relevant documents. He had several driver's licenses, a few from the recently deceased and a few that had been made by illicit providers. He selected one from a man of generally similar appearance, whom they had drained less than a month prior, and gave that, along with the insurance card from the glove compartment, to the trooper. "Here you go, sir." He put his hand on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead. Daffy and Wan kept their hands in view. They knew how to keep law enforcers happy. Don't give them any reason to get scared. The trooper took the licenses back to his car, and several long minutes afterwards, he approached them once more, but stopped at the rear bumper. "Sir, step out of the vehicle. Approach me slowly and carefully." He glanced at the passing traffic as a way to communicate why he'd issued the instructions the way he had. Weasel, with no better choices, complied. He kept his hands visible and used them to partially shield his eyes from the still flashing lights and his face from the dash camera. "Why won't this dude turn off the front flashers? They usually do, man," he informed, his internal dialogue. "Is there like a problem, officer?" "Place your hands on the trunk, sir. I'm going to pat search you for weapons for your safety and mine." Weasel again complied, and as the trooper placed hands on him and began to slide them around his body, the officer asked, "Are you carrying any weapons or contraband, sir?" Weasel was ready for the question. No, man. Sir, I'm a peace lover." "How is it that the name on your driver's license and the name on the insurance card don't match?" the trooper inquired. Weasel shrugged as the trooper checked his belt line. "I borrowed it from my friend, sir." He gave the name that he recalled from the insurance card, and the trooper nodded. When the trooper had completed his search, he sidestepped towards the passenger side and asked Daffodil to step out of the car. He directed her to stand on the passenger side of the rear quarter panel so she would not be visible to either Weasel or the dash cam, especially with the still flashing lights, at least from the waist down. With the front of his car turned towards the highway, what he did next was off camera. He asked Daffy about whether she had any weapons on her. As he ran his hands down her legs, he asked a few more standard questions about where they were headed and what they were doing. When he ran his hand back up her legs, she discovered what a creep he was. He paused at the junction of her thigh and hip and massaged her for a moment. She froze in shock and stiffened, her answer to his last inquiry immediately stifled. Before she could say anything, he stood and motioned to the back of their new car. "Okay, ma'am, join the driver. Both of you keep your hands on the trunk." He went through the same motions with Wanda, who was a little prepared by Daffodil's looking earnestly into her eyes and silently mouthing, "He's a freak." A fact Wanda soon understood. She did not freeze up as had Daffy, since she'd been prepared as possible. The trooper seemed to like that and patted her backside as he stood. On the side facing away from the camera, creepy but clever, she seethed, she joined her companions. The trooper, after trying to convince them to open the trunk and voluntarily allow him to search the car, smirked. with his back to his own windshield and gave up. He issued a citation to Weasel for some minor traffic infraction and sent them on their way. "I can't believe he did that!" Daffodil screeched into Weasel's ear. He flinched. Did what? They don't usually put their hands on she-males, but he didn't get any further. "He felt us up, Weasel," Wanda said emphatically from the back seat. She had her head turned to look out the passenger window with a distant look on her features, no doubt reliving some past similar trauma. "Why do you think he kept the lights flashing and aimed his dash cam to your side, but kept us on our side?" Daffodil asked with slightly less volume. He talked into his microphone like we were just having a conversation, but all the while he was groping his way to cop a feel. Weasel snickered a little. "Cop a feel? Seriously?" His companions did not see the humor, and for the rest of the drive he was alternatingly harangued with speeches about unwanted touching and stony silence with occasional glares. He had the decency to sincerely apologize, but they all knew that he would eventually use the joke again. It was in their nature to remain as they had been in life. Val drove in the general direction of the police department. She didn't know the address of the storage facility or quite how vehicles were stored and handled as evidence. She knew only the book version from school. However, she had contacts at the BD and soon knew where to go. She had no idea how she was going to get into the lot and maybe have a look at the van, possibly even catch a look at the vampires after hours on a weekend. There would likely be an attendant, and officers would be bringing evidence all night long. She mused on what to do. I'll play it by ear and plan to scout tonight, but be ready for a crap storm, as Uncle Early called them. Always so polite in my hearing. Her thoughts threatened to go off in a distracted direction, so she shifted focus back to her surroundings. Her GPS informed her that her destination was 2 blocks ahead on the right. She did not notice the ratty old minivan that was parked in the shadows at the curbside. She saw that the front gate included a guard's shack, but no one was immediately visible through the darkening glass. She continued on around the block to look for possibilities. She could wait until Monday. She had a good excuse to see the van since Scott was her client. Yet she felt in her gut that she needed to see the van without delay. She saw what she suspected was the vehicle storage area. It was a tall structure with a metal roll-up door, like the cargo area on Scott's truck. A stray thought intruded. Wait, one of the doors is open, but no light coming from inside. A horn blasted into her perception, and she swiveled back into her own lane. "Merde, I hate jump scares," she declared emphatically to her interior dialogue. Time to park and look on foot. She found a safe place to park on the roadside and pulled on her dark hoodie, gloves, and backpack. She had already sported her belt pack with the smooth 9mm and extra magazines. She took hold of her small but very bright flashlight and began to walk around the outside fence. She had already driven around most of the back 3 sides and was near the street with the gate. It didn't take long for her to reach it. She paused and looked carefully at the gate shack. It was still dark and definitely gave off a creepy vibe. She checked the gates and saw that the entrance gate was slightly ajar. It was on the track, but the lock plate had not quite been touched. She wondered briefly if there was an alarm. It was too unusual, so she considered just calling the city dispatch office and getting some official help. Maybe I can get in with the rush, she pondered. Still, if I can take care of it, maybe I should. She stopped that train of thought, though. This isn't like the Dogman and Wolfman stuff, she chastised herself. The vamps are dangerous, but they die easier, and may still be a mystery to officials. Besides, these things have the sense to flee official intervention. The responders will be okay, especially if I portray the vamps as meth heads. She dialed and rapidly explained. When Daffy and Wan arrived at the storage facility, it had taken them some time to recognize what it was. The signage was minimal, and it was the guard shack that gave him the clue they needed. "Let's park down the street a little way," Daffodil suggested. Wanda agreed. "Yeah, if we can get the van to roll, we may not need this heap. We should probably change cars anyway." They approached the guard station from down the sidewalk, working at a normal pace, their improved eyesight allowing them to see that there was a singular occupant in the structure. The windows were darkened, but they were predators, so they could see clearly that the creature who was in their way was old, fat, and unattentive. He stared down at a brightly lit screen, grinning like a fool at some program he had pulled up on his device. Wanda turned to Daffodil. "Can you believe that? I can hear the music he's streaming. The Beverly Hillbillies. I remember that show. My parents loved it." She said the last a little wistfully. She often wondered what had happened to her family, how they'd responded when she didn't return from the trip with her friends. What had they thought happened to her? They stood outside the booth for several minutes, silent and staring. It was a game they liked to play. Plus, they had to decide whether any noise would be heard by others, or whether their actions would be observed. In the time they waited, not even one vehicle passed down the street. A few turned down the block, but none approached the gates. Eventually, Daffodil ran her long, thickened nails down the glass. They scored it and left 4 parallel trails. The attendant looked up. He was a retired on active duty sergeant, likely assigned to light duty station because he was too decrepit to do anything else. He looked up startled and then annoyed. He raised his voice to be heard through the glass. "This is the police department property. Continue on down the sidewalk, ladies." Wanda and Daffodil rendered their horrific smiles, all leering mouths, fangs and burning eyes in the dark, sunken sockets. The man tugged at the pistol he wore, then decided that he should be outside the booth. He opened the door, which was on the opposite side from the 2 freaky women, and stepped out. He intended to circle around to cover them, his pistol now out and at the ready. Yet they had circled the front of the booth, still outside the gates. One boosted the other over the chain-link fence, dropped her feet on the inside, and quickly ducked into the booth. "Hey, get out! You can't—" The old officer stuttered in confusion and in stress. He was cut off when Daffodil landed on him. She had scrambled up after Wanda, climbed onto the roof of the shack, and jumped out and onto the old man. She heard the gate rumble behind her as Wanda at last found the controls and opened it a hand's breadth. She began to laugh when she saw that the man had rolled back onto the ground, jerked and spasmed a few times, and then lay still, his pistol still grasped in one hand. "Fat old pig died on us." She giggled insanely. "Just as well we're already full and there'll be no mystery. No reason for the other pigs to look for anybody." Afterwards, they crapped around the facilities until they found the garage. It took a while to find the right keys on the now cold body of the sergeant, but then they were able to unlock and raise the doors. They immediately found their beloved old VW van. It was all but destroyed. They crept closer and sniffed at the gunky blood that had come from their longtime companion and part-time lover, Weasel. They paused and had a good long cry. If there was an alarm and anyone showed, they could always run or hide. This was a moment to excise the hurt they felt. They were no longer able to physically shed tears, but their cries were still heartfelt. as much as they were capable. After a while, they decided to search the van for necessities. It would be a while before they would be able to steal it back and get it repaired, but some of the items, from when they were turned, might give them some comfort and let them rest. There were plenty of creaks and pops, and the rancid odor of petrol filled the air. They ignored all of that, but they had come across a few collisions in their travels and had drained more than one crash survivor while accompanied by the smell of gasoline. It wasn't like the movies where cars exploded at the slightest bump. There had to be a spark to ignite the blaze, and there was no trail of liquid fuel from the wreckage. After a while, they realized that no one would come into the facility in response to their presence, and they relaxed. Going through their possessions as they talked their way down memory lane. Their discussion was as much of a memorial service as Weasel and Raisin would get. Val waited for a while after she disconnected from her call. Dispatch was busy with Friday Night Mayhem, so it might be a while. She stepped in closer to the booth and peered inside. She could see a monitor reflecting on the inside, glazing near the back of the booth. One of the small images, distorted by this angle, showed two figures standing outside a wrecked VW van that sported similar flower images, now smudged by grime and scrapes. She did not hesitate. She put away her flashlight and drew her pistol, used her butt to open the gate, and glided smoothly into the property yard and towards the shadows near the garage. On the way, she noted a lump of crumpled and dead body in the uniform of a city police. She knew what it was. She had seen similar remains. She recognized the profound stillness of death. She resumed her stalk towards the garage and found the unlocked, slightly open garage door. There were no windows, but she could tell that the lighting inside was very dim. The vampires wouldn't need it, but she was glad to have it anyway to see what she was doing. She heard muffled voices, old, dry, and a little creaky. Feathery, she thought, like dead leaves rattling together in an autumn breeze. There was the noise of items being shifted and then some gurgling giggles. No, the gurgling of a bong. These undead monsters were getting high. She switched to a one-handed grip and withdrew the present Uncle Earl had given her and had admonished her to use only in an emergency. She used her foot to get the garage door going upward, on its rollers, and as soon as she could duck inside, she did. She walked towards the van. Even in one of their inebriated conditions, the vamps were on alert. They piled out of the van and stood beside one another, arms akimbo, except that one still held the bong. They stood ready to take out the noisy mortal woman who looked too good for her own sake. Before Val could react, the bong hurtled into her head and she was knocked nearly unconscious. The pistol slid from her hand, yet she still gripped the flashbang, similar to the one the sheriff had given to Uncle Earl and that had saved his girlfriend, Miriam's, life. She groggily removed the pin while keeping a tight grip on the device. She heard harsh laughter from the two undead creatures. "I love smashing pretty faces," Daffy cackled in triumph. "Our look's faded, so why not hers?" Wan enjoyed a cackle of her own. Bong went the bong on the bitch's head, like the gong of the bell. "Can't think of a good rhyme for bitches," she guffawed. "Like, doesn't matter. She lived pretty, but she's gonna die bleeding." Both women recovered from their sinister mirth as Valerie rolled onto her side and tossed the little device, then rolled away and curled into a protective ball. It sailed past the angry vampires and landed inside the van. Her back was to the undead women, who laughed in victory. "Missed, pretty bitch," Daffodil snarled. Wanda turned to her friend to add a snarky comment, but they were engulfed in a fireball as the white-hot flashbang ignited the fumes that emanated from the slightly open fuel tank. The explosion was not terrific, but the fireball was. Val scrambled away from the intense heat as quickly as she could. The fire had singed her hair and the back of her jacket, but she was otherwise unharmed. Still, she wanted to get away from the heat and the screams as the two hippie chicks ignited and soon joined the hippie dudes with whom they had been transformed from obnoxious youth into genuine monsters. They collapsed and soon were no more than twin piles of ashes smeared on the floor of the garage. Val climbed to her feet and put away her pistol. She left the building and made her way to the gate shack. She called into dispatch and asked them to add a fire truck to their response. Well, Mr. Wilson, it took some heavy-duty splaining, but we are now both cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, Miss Valerie Lefevre, Esquire, informed her client. Since you are cleared, it gives me a win on my experiment with criminal law, so I look good to the partners. The police chief and the district attorney, the sheriff, and Colonel Walters all agree that I did the right thing in taking out the two meth monkeys. That was the official story. No one wanted to talk about the bloodless bodies or Trujillo's afterlife activities. Turns out they were doing an internal investigation on him for some pretty bad actions he performed while he was alive. She brushed at the rapid healing wound on her forehead, just to the right of her widow's peak. It would make a thin pink scar that enhanced rather than distracted from her striking appearance once the itching stopped. She did not like the shorter hairstyle necessitated by removing the singed and stinking portion of her coiffure. But as Uncle Earl would say, don't worry, it'll grow back. Long as you're alive, you're lovely. Scott looked down at his lunch plate and shook his head. I just can't believe it. Real, live, or, well, unalive, undead, vampire? Freaky. That kind of stuff just shouldn't be. Val gave him an enigmatic smile. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, Scott, than we have dreamt of in your philosophy. Not the first creatures I've seen stalk from the pages of fiction right out into the bright light of day. Well, into the silvery light of the moon. Yet there were some natural features that animated them. Surreal science, yet science all the same. Not much of a supernatural factor as far as I can tell. I'm glad you're back to your long hauls, and I'm sure your family is as well. Please be safe, and speaking as a country girl who grew up on a highway frequented by logging trucks, don't engine brake when you pass private homes. It's really loud. So quoth this raven. That was such a fun crossover, was it not? Bears universes, so fun to visit. I hope you all have a lovely day. Camp story up on Saturday and a special collab for Valentine's Day with my fellow Corvids. Have a lovely Thursday, darlings. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.